Welcome to the Crown City Podcast. I'm your host, James DiPietro. From Pasadena, California, this is a show about building a community for all and how we make our neighborhoods our home. On this episode, we have a very special guest, Andre Coleman, the managing editor of Pasadena Now. So Andre, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to finally be here.
So you hinted at that. So this conversation has been 3 years. I think we talked about this. 3 years in the making.
3 years in the making.
I think we talked about it in the fall of 2020.
That's right.
And so I'm so happy, and it kind of all came together last minute.
Right. And my apologies for not getting down here sooner. We tried this several times, but things get in the way.
You're busy, and you're doing great work at Pasadena Now, and we're going to get into that. So I'm so happy to have you here. It's raining outside. It's cold in here as well, but we're going to have a great conversation. Okay. I'm really looking forward to it. So you are not new to Pasadena Media. We're in Pasadena Media right now because you had actually co-hosted a show called News Wrap. I was wondering if you can talk about News Wrap before we kind of jump into our conversation.
First off, it's great to be back at Pasadena Media. I'm a big supporter of the station, everything they do here. As far as I'm concerned, the House of Florida rocks. So let me just get that out of the way. A lot of people don't know the first iteration of News Wrap. The first time I was on the station was with Larry Wilson during the King riots. We were both working at the Star News. I was a sports writer. He was working in opinion editorial kind of thing. So that's many years back. Let's put it that way. Years later, Barry Gordon invited me to come over when the station was still up on Woodbury. He started News Wrap, and he asked me to come up and do a show with him. He interviewed me, but Barry and I have always just, we have that chemistry. We clicked. And so I came back for a couple more guest spots, and before, which grew into a co-hosting kind of thing. And then that iteration, when they moved the station, died, or went on hiatus, I like to say. And then George approached me and approached Barry and said, hey, bring it back. So we started it back up here. News Wrap was an amazing thing for me because, especially up on Woodbury, I would get stopped 2 or 3 times a day by people I didn't know who told me they watched News Wrap. And we had live call-in up there. And police chiefs called in, mayors called in, council members called in. So everybody was apparently watching and taking part in the conversation, which I thought was amazing.
That's really unique.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So you wrapped it up, no pun intended, in 2021.
Right.
Was the last iteration.
Right.
Do you miss it?
Yes and no. I largely miss working with Barry because Barry and I have this amazing. Barry and I are a lot alike, where people think we wouldn't be, but Barry and I are a lot alike, especially in our political views. But we also, Barry, professional actor, voiceover artist, performer all of his life, kind of thing. We have amazing timing with each other, where some of the stuff on News Wrap, none of it was ever rehearsed. But I saw the openings, Barry saw the openings, so sometimes we'd throw each other fastballs and the other one would hit it out of the park. So there was some comedy in there. There was some performance to News Wrap because you're talking, so you have to keep it interesting for the audience. But we always believed what we said. Nobody was pretending. But there was some, we kind of turned our personalities up on the high, to engage the audience. So I missed working with Barry. I didn't miss the long Fridays of getting off work and then coming over and waiting another 2 hours to get a show done. But now, I was telling somebody last night, just because I'm not doing it doesn't mean there shouldn't be News Wrap.
Right.
I would still, I passed it to Justin Chapman. And Justin Chapman, now who is Steve Madison's field representative, field liaison.
And Justin's been a guest on this show.
Oh,
number of years
Great
ago.
guy, good friend of mine. And so, you know, I passed it to Justin. Justin won awards with it. And then now he's evolved to do another show, largely because of his employment with the city. But I'd still like to see it passed on to somebody else to see it in another format. And what actually, when we were up at Woodbury, there were 3 versions of News Wrap. It became so popular.
Really?
Yeah, at one point, Barry did national by himself. I did local by myself. And Stuart Johnson, who worked up there, used to work for the station, he did a dinner table version of News Wrap where he did it, where it was just, he would have a guest and talk like he was around the dinner table. So, I mean, it was immensely popular at that point. So, I always say there's space for it. I mean, News Wrap should be a constant in the city. So, I would like to see somebody else. It's up to Justin. Right. He had it last. If Justin wants to pass it to somebody else, I would wish them well.
Very nice. Well, that's a great segue into kind of your background. So you grew up in Altadena, is that correct? So what was Altadena and Pasadena like when you were growing up? And because you also went to John Muir High School.
I went to, yes, I'm a PUSD product. I think now the barriers between Altadena and Pasadena are a little more clearly defined.
Really?
But it wasn't like that when I was growing up.
That's interesting.
I guess I kind of look at those teen years and that stuff as a lot of that is intertwined with my time at John Muir. But to moonwalk back, you have to remember that the first day I went to school was the first day that PUSD was integrated through a court order, and it was the first school district west of the Mississippi to receive a court order. And so those same kids, we kind of all went through school together. You know, different schools at times. You know, you go to this school, maybe that kid would go to this school. But by the time we got to high school, everybody was pretty much at, of course, PHS, Blair, or Muir. So what made it so amazing was that there was no racial context to it. We were completely integrated. All anybody cared about, a good friend of mine, Pablo Morales, who did the documentary on John Muir. I don't know if he's been on here.
He has been.
See?
He's been a guest.
I'm not surprised. He may have even said it, but when Pablo and I talk about it, we always say the only thing we cared about was who has a car and where's the party. And it could be at the white guy's house, Mexican guy's house, black guy's house. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. You hung out with all of those people, and all those people were your friends. Nobody cared. I mean, of course, there were people who didn't get along, but we didn't have a lot of racial hangups. You know, I thought, and it shows my naivete, that I lived by the time I got to college, I thought I was in a post-racial society. So to see all this stuff that's come back since then a lot of it has been, for a while, was culture shock for me. And, of course, you kind of start thinking every place is like where you grew up, but every place was not Altadena.
Right. That's really interesting. So you have a really interesting story. Who were some of your early mentors? And these could be academic, professional, that were especially important to you, and why?
My biggest mentor professionally was Kevin Urich, my former boss at the Weekly. Kevin was just a great newsman. He had this amazing eye for news. And Kevin had worked at the Star News like I had. You know, I started my career as a sports writer at the Star News. Kevin was a reporter at the Star News when I was there. Mm-hmm. So I was Kevin's deputy editor at the Weekly, but Kevin could tell you not only why something was a story, but the historical context.
Which is really important.
Of that story. And that's I've had the advantage of understanding, at this point, having done this for so many years. I think now I have an advantage because I understand the historical context of Pasadena, Altadena, and many parts of San Gabriel Valley. And I see a lot of young reporters come in, and they're covering these stories, but you can tell they don't have the relationship, and you can tell they don't understand the historical context. And I think that's what makes news relevant, is historical content. Kevin was a really big mentor. Somebody else who, and I don't know if he listens, but this is going to surprise people, Larry Wilson. Larry's a good friend of mine, and watching Larry at the Star News do the opinion section and watching him over the years navigate the Star News, running it at times, is something that I really paid attention to. Mm. So those two guys were really big influences on me. And Larry worked at the Weekly for a while. Those would be the two people who I would say. Kevin was the biggest mentor, but Larry was somebody that I looked up to and really have a lot of respect for, to this day.
So when did you know you wanted to be a writer? Because you started out in sports.
Watergate.
Really?
I think people marvel at this, but I think every reporter in my age group is somehow influenced by Watergate. Because I remember being a child and watching, it preempted all my shows and all my cartoons and all that stuff, and watching the Watergate hearings, and my mother and my aunt explaining it to me, that these two reporters busted the president. And I thought, reporters can take down the president? Wow. And my future was pretty much set from that point. I mean, I became probably 9, 10 years old. I was reading every newspaper I could get my hands on every day.
It was funny. I took a trip when I was young to Washington, D.C., and I didn't even understand the Washington Post because I was in my, I don't know, I was maybe 10 or 11. But I wanted, and it was important to me that I got a copy of the Washington Post.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's in the zeitgeist.
Right.
You know, it was, I told my parents, I just want to buy a copy of the Washington Post for whatever day we were there for. But it had an impact on that.
In some places at my mom's house, there was a scrapbook with all of the articles I cut out from not just the hearings, but leading up to Nixon's resignation. Consider that by the time I was in college, Ronald Reagan was president. And so by then, we were doing the Ollie North hearings, which people compared back to Watergate. And so it was a callback moment for me, because once again, reporters were breaking this news on the President of the United States. And there was, I mean, look, they were never going to kick Reagan out of office, let's just be real. But there was scant talk, not like now where they may impeach you or me if they get a chance. But there was scant talk of impeachment, back then. And even people who went when Bush Sr. ran, the rumor has always been he picked Dan Quayle because he was smart enough to pick a vice president. They would never impeach him because they wouldn't want that guy to be VP. So that, back then journalism it carried much more weight than it does now in the country, unfortunately.
So you're the managing editor of Pasadena now. And I was able to meet your publisher last year, James. And I told him that he's the only name that I want to see at 7 a.m. in the morning, because that's when the email goes out and it comes out from him.
Right.
So I see his name every single morning at 7 a.m. So what role do you think Pasadena now plays in our community?
Right now, we're huge. Right now, everybody reads us. I think the biggest thing we've accomplished is, when I got there, I remember my quote in the Weekly. I'm sorry. I remember I was still at the Weekly and I read the story James put out saying that I was on my way to Pasadena now. And I remember my quote was, we were going to do a deep dive in the City Hall like it's never been done before. Before then, newspapers covered the City Council. Maybe every now and then you get an ed tech or public safety story. But my thing when I got there was, we're covering every meeting, everything. Now, COVID kind of got in the way a little bit, and we had to learn how to cover COVID. But people are getting more information out of City Hall and out of their elected officials than they've ever gotten locally. Star News used to have 2 reporters on City Hall, and they still did not give as much content as we do now. Now, the downside is people have gotten so much information that they become not just spoiled, but they become desensitized to it. thing. They don't pay attention to some of it, or they take a who cares attitude about some of it, or Pasadena now is attacking, or Pasadena now is on the take, whatever. But our job is, I don't care about that stuff. My job is to make sure that we put our best foot forward every day, and at 7 a.m., everybody who gets that email, we've made every effort to give them the most pertinent information that they need going into the day. And if they don't have it, they're going to get it very soon because we can update it anytime we want.
I know that's the advantage of having an online publication. Right. You're not waiting for the next publication to drop on your driveway.
Right.
So we're taping this on February 20th. Mm-hmm. So following some events that happened over the weekend, and journalistic standards are really important to you.
Of course.
And so I was just reading, there was a series of brawls on Saturday, and there's an article that went out on Monday, and then today
there's
a correction.
Right.
And at the bottom of the correction was a paragraph about how ethical standards were really important to Pasadena now, and you'll continue. That'll be that's your motto, and that's your creed that you live by.
Right.
And I thought that was so important and so refreshing, because we've gotten, like you said, we've become so desensitized to information, and we don't know what's real or what's not.
Right.
And that very few publications will actually update.
Right.
Once something goes out.
That correction to me was the most important thing in the paper today.
I agree.
It does not matter, and this was my opinion on it. It does not matter if someone else told us the incorrect information. Pasadena published the information is what counts. And so it's our responsibility to correct the record. I'm not really hung up on how people respond, because to me, it's you get the facts out.
Right.
And then the public has to deal with the facts.
Right.
Some people, it amazes me when people make James McPherson or Andre Coleman the issue. Okay. You know what? If that's what you have time to do, then I'm like, okay. You know, usually those people don't know me personally.
Right.
But it's our job to present facts.
Right.
Largely, when you do this, you're not doing gotcha. You're not doing sensationalism. You're asking direct questions of me, and I'm giving you factual answers. And so when we get it wrong, and I say this to people all the time, not as an excuse, but it's a reality. The sheer number of words we print every day is astronomical.
Do you have a sense of how many words you do? Out of curiosity.
Our average story is about 600 words.
Okay.
We do about 20 stories a day.
Really?
Multiply
it.
Multiply it. Anybody who does, if a teacher did 600 lessons a day, she'd mess up. If a singer did 600 performances a day, that performer is going to go, I need a break. It's just an astronomical number.
It is.
Of words. For a copy editor, 3 copy editors, 5 copy editors, 20 copy editors, to look at and go, now if it's 20, obviously you have one person per story then.
Right.
We don't have 20. So and sometimes the stories are coming back to back to back. So I'll give you an example. COVID. The day COVID hit Pasadena and they started shutting stuff down, okay, we did 35 stories.
Really?
So my original front page at 7 a.m. was completely gone by 5 p.m. And those stories did not come in every 2 hours. Art night canceled, and everybody canceled after that. And it went, finished a story, oh, just got a press release. So-and-so's closing down. Just got a press release. Just got a press release. So it's back to back to back. And I'm assigning people and writing and saying, stay calm. Nobody's ever done this before. We have to write the book. We're going to get through today, maybe at 1 a.m., maybe at midnight, maybe at 5 o'clock. I don't know, but I need people to just write, turn it in. We're going to copy edit. We're going to get through it. We got through it. But that was a day that just I'll never forget. If there's a fire on the mountain, and sometimes there are, we may do 20 updates on the fire in 2 days. So when I say 20 stories, you're not always getting those 20 stories over between, I'm up at 5. You're not getting them post 7 a.m. to 5 o'clock. Yesterday was all about the brawl. It was all about the brawl. So I probably took 20 phone calls by 1 o'clock before we wrote an update. And before then, we're determining, okay, we're going to need a correction kind of thing. So some days, everything's just about focusing on one story.
Sure.
When John Kennedy died, God rest his soul, it was a full day of quotes coming in, not getting facts, but giving information. There's a lot of times when we spend more time disseminating information because people will read something and call and say, "Oh my God." Some people just need to be heard. Like with John Kennedy, some people called crying just to say how sad they were. There was no quote involved. I didn't know some of the people. There was no quote. There was no, your coverage is right or wrong. It was just, I just read this. This is how I feel. Now, what was crazy about that was that information began to trickle in about, and I don't mean to hijack, that information began to trickle in about 2 hours before we broke the news. And we were waiting for, sometimes it's in our best interest. See, people think scoop, 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 scoop. It doesn't work that way. Sometimes it's in your best information to get, it's always in your best interest to be correct. But sometimes it is in your best interest to slow down and go, what are we doing? What is the city saying? What is the family saying? What is the mayor saying? Because when we had this information that this was beginning to look bleak, and I started calling around and say, hey, what's going on? A couple people told me, hey, all the council members haven't been made aware. We're making these phone calls now. Can you please just chill for a minute? We don't need people overreacting. And I don't want to do notification. And I'll get to making that mistake when I was at the Weekly, which is where I learned this lesson. So in that,
It's not your job.
it's not my job.
No.
I'm not the police. I'm not the coroner.
Right.
So we slowed down. And then when we got official word, I called the city and I went, okay, Pasadena Now is going to go with one paragraph in 5 minutes. And then we will wait for a city response or family response. And then we will continue to go with our story. Well, we went with our story. And unfortunately, when our story came out, or when it happened, there were meetings, there were all this other stuff that were already going on at City Hall about other things. So all of these other quotes came in, poured in from PCC, the NAACP, and all these other places before we got the city quote. So what is our responsibility there?
Right.
And so then it becomes, okay, let's do an update with John's background, and let's include one quote. Well, now we have 20 quotes backed up, and we still don't have a city quote. But I know people work at the city, I'm sure you do too. They're going, we've got to get a quote out because this is our, he's a Pasadena councilman, but now the Board of Supervisors, the LA City Council, the Arcadia City Council, the police, everybody else, their quotes are starting to appear. And now Pasadena Now is not the only one telling the story. Channel 4 is telling this story. The Star News is telling this story. The Black Pages, Colorado Boulevard. There is no scoop there. We're all, and how do you, and I always say this to people, look, you don't scoop birth, and you don't scoop when people get out of here. Because guess what? There is no fact after that. Somebody was born, there's a whole lot of people, including the doctor, who knows. Somebody's time ends, the family and a whole lot of other people know, and they're mourning. So then you have to be sensitive to your words because people are contacting the family based on what you write. And that's what we lose in this business a lot, is that people, when you rush to be first, you can lack that empathy, that sympathy, and just you can lack feeling and emotion. And people do count.
They do. And I think that you've done a really good job balancing that. You know, you're not just we're going to talk about two features that I really enjoy about Pasadena now. One is political gumbo. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that. Which is is it Monday's column?
It's most Mondays.
Most Mondays.
Yeah, if I'm not tired of it for a while. Sometimes I get tired of it for a while.
Which, I mean, I don't know how you not get tired of it currently. We're in the middle of a primary season,
Right.
an election season. Hopefully things will calm down in about 2 weeks, but you never know.
You don't.
But it's been crazy the last
Right.
last month.
Right.
So why did you start doing this political gumbo column, and what do you enjoy most about it, or what do you hate most about it?
Well, I hate that people take it so seriously.
That's fair.
I do write political gumbo, but I write it in character. It's kind of like news rap.
Yeah, I
It's
understand.
snarky. It's
Yes.
sarcastic. It's in your face. I've gone back and forth with the mayor before, and he got it that, okay, it's not personal. It's my turn.
It's a bit.
It's a bit. Sometimes I've taken shots at activists. They take it really personal. But sometimes, look, the point of political gumbo is for you to talk about what I write. It's for you to talk about the issue. So if I say, like, tomorrow's political gumbo it's going to probably do that. But if I say, one of my favorites was, I said that, so during the post-pandemic, when people were still calling into city council and not going in, I wrote, oh yeah, I've got this old album at my house, and the beauty of this album is it skips. You get to this one part and it says the same thing over and over and over. And so I started quoting the lyrics, and then I slowly morphed into what people were saying to council over and over and over and over. And I said, yeah, it's like a broken record. It gets you absolutely nowhere to play this thing over and over and over. But it has some sentimental value, and I want to hear it. But it'd be nice to get one that's just smooth and artistic. Oh, it was a Jackson 5 song, Who's Loving You. That's what and I do have that album. Well, the point is obvious. You guys sound like a broken record.
Right.
So activists lost their minds. How dare you? And this is my cause, and this. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, you read it, huh? And I wrote it. So if you call me about it, I'll talk to you. And so I said, look, the point of it is to say, you've been saying this for 6 months, and you're not getting anywhere. Doesn't mean your cause isn't worthy. It just means, is your cause just a phone call? So sometimes it's aimed at activists. Sometimes it's aimed at the election. Sometimes it's aimed at journalism. Sometimes it's aimed at me. It's self-deprecating. Sometimes
I think you enjoy it because it allows you the freedom to kind of let loose a little bit.
it does, and that's why I enjoy it. But when I got to Pasadena, what I thought Pasadena was missing was soul. Something that was the soul of the paper. The Weekly had a lot of great political cartoons. And those cartoons I thought were the soul of the paper. And one of the things that led to me quitting was the new owners came in and went, no more political cartoons. And I went, why would you take away free political cartoons? Well, you're upsetting half the audience. Is that not the point? But those people who are upset write letters to us. And guess what? Those are the ones who pick it up every week so they can call me a commie. But they pick it up. Muhammad Ali got over originally not because people loved him, but because people hated him. And he got his stick from a pro wrestler. And every pro wrestler in the world will tell you who puts the butts in the seats? The bad guy. So that's the soul. And now how do we remember Muhammad Ali? Civil rights icon.
Right.
One of the greatest athletes of the 20th century. He would tell you if he was here, he was the greatest, the prettiest, and all that other stuff. But, Political gumbo is designed to shake people up. And I believe that in our political environment, we need to shake people up. I'm not going to say his name, and we'll talk soon and everything. A really good friend of mine, because in my last political gumbo, I mentioned, there was one about term limits. And I mentioned Trump and Santos. And locally, a really good friend of mine went, "How come you didn't mention any of these Democratic politicians? You just said Trump and Santos. Lose my number." And I laughed, and I didn't even respond. I just laughed and thought, that's what you got out of it? You know me, and you know what political gumbo is, and you're this upset about it? So I like the fact that it shakes people up. And our readership goes up by, I think, between 8 and 11% every time political gumbo is in the paper.
Really?
It does what it's supposed to do. It does. And I wrote about 3 of them when I was at the Weekly, but they wouldn't let me be snarky then. So thank you, James McPherson, for allowing me to be snarky. And I know sometimes it keeps James up at night because he knows what the reaction is going to be the next day. But now, originally, I don't think people see it as divisive anymore.
No.
I think now people see it as it's a really good column and it's worth reading and it has some good points.
Yeah, I agree. So journalism is radically changing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're taping this in February. I think a couple of weeks ago, the LA Times laid off 20% of their newsroom staff. How has Pasadena now been able to kind of buck that trend and grow at a time when journalism has been shrinking and is kind of a shell of itself?
Well, I'm going to tell you the mistake I've always thought the LA Times was making, even before this. In the 80s, the LA Times decided to be, let me back up. In the 30s, papers were identified by what was going on in their communities. In Chicago, they covered the mob, for obvious reason. LA covered the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. And New York did whatever New York did. You know, New York covered New York, I guess is the best way to say it. A lot of corruption in government was what New York did. So the famous story was that the LA Times was such a Hollywood kind of glitz and glamour kind of thing that when the Watts riot started, Otis Chandler was the publisher. That's when the Chandler family owned it. And Otis was a surfer. He would bring his board into his office.
Really?
Yeah, when he walked in. And somebody ran in and went, "Mr. Chandler, they're rioting in Watts." And Otis Chandler's response is, "Where's Watts?" They were not the paper they are now. So they took an ad guy, an African-American ad rep, trained him in journalism for like 2 hours and sent him out and he won a Pulitzer. And I've been doing it for almost 40 years and never come close. So what does that say about it? But the point is, back then the Times had LA on the front page everywhere. Now the Times wants to be the Post. They want to be the New York Times. You have all this stuff that's still going on in Bellflower and Watts and right around the Times area, but they want to cover all this other stuff. So they're not going to beat CNN.
No.
But CNN isn't going to cover Watts.
Right.
CNN is going to follow the Times into Watts. So when the stuff was happening, the embezzlement scandal in the area surrounding Compton from 10, 15 years ago, huge story for the Times that everybody chased behind the Times. But look, I get it. You have to cover some of D.C., but it doesn't have to be above the fold in the top story. We don't live in D.C.
Right.
Pasadena now succeeds by being hyper-local to Pasadena. I've turned in, James and I have argued because I've seen San Marino stories that I thought we should cover. Nope, not Pasadena. We will cover story if it impacts Pasadena, but we are hyper-local. And because we're hyper-local, the issue we're facing now is that where a lot of people think it's great, I worry about it because now all the TV stations get the same email you get at 7 a.m. So by 8 a.m. sometimes my top story's not my top story anymore. You know, it's now I'll give you a great example. Mickey Cooper, Michael Cooper's brother. Um, our top story locally for several days, and then everybody else, all the TV picked it up, and that's natural now. That's what happens. But again, it makes when people start gravitating onto what you do. By the time you get a great idea and you're successful at it, somebody is already doing it and found a new wrinkle to it you didn't figure out. So, yes, at some point, somebody else will come up with something akin to what we do. And then we have to figure out how we continue to get better. So my thing with what we do is I audit the paper every day. And I'm always thinking, how can we get better? How can we get better in our city council coverage? How can we get better in our preview stories? How can we get better? How do we serve the community better? Kind of thing. At one point, when I first got there, I had a 1 p.m. edition also. But the 1 p.m. edition was so successful that we started updating throughout the day. So I no longer needed a 1 p.m. edition. But I got the 1 p.m. edition because the Star News used to throw a morning edition and an evening edition like every other paper in the country. But it became too expensive to hire morning and evening staff. But I was like, but I have that. So I'll do that. Now we just update throughout the day. Nobody has really found a way. NBC can't do that. The Star News can do it, but it means they would have to put greater resources online than print, and they're still a print product. So right now, we still have that airspace, but I don't think that airspace is going to be ours forever.
So at this kind of critical time in journalism, as readers, how can we stay informed by sources that we can trust? Because there are so few. You mentioned the Star News. I had subscribed to the Star News for a number of years, but then stopped. I don't want to trash the Star News, but they were getting. I didn't want to see feed from Orange County.
There you go.
Because they're a publication that's owned by. It's
Right.
a conglomerate.
Right.
So I'm getting Orange County stories. I'm getting stories from all over the place. I'm like, I don't want those stories. I want stories from here. And we were both in a meeting recently where Larry Wilson was talking about how there used to be 200 people at the Pasadena Star News in Pasadena. Now there are only 2 people covering Pasadena, and really it's kind of like 1.5.
Right.
So as readers, as consumers, how do we find sources that we can trust?
Get off social media. No. Don't look for your news on social media. Social media is a link fest. Everybody on social media thinks they're a reporter. Look, I don't think I'm a lawyer. I'm not. I don't think I'm a judge. I don't think I run a TV station. I could give everybody on social media my keyboard and go, give me 600 good words. You got 10 minutes. They'll be in the fetal position in 5. Trust me. Especially if I say, hey, this is breaking news. I need it in 5 minutes. Give me 600 words. They can't do it. I guarantee you. And I know that because college kids who've been trained in journalism, right out of journalism, can't do it.
I feel like I'm a good writer, and I couldn't do that.
You probably can't. And that's no offense to you.
No, it's not.
And what you do here is great.
And I'm not offended
But
by it
we're
at all.
talking about an art form.
It is. Absolutely.
And just because you have a social media page and you give me your opinion, it does not mean you're giving me news.
Right.
So I would say, don't look for your news on social media. Social media is commentary on the news. I think, and this isn't great business for Pasadena now, but it's my personal opinion, everybody should subscribe to Star News. But I think the Star News, their only hope, which is never going to happen, is if they were not part of that conglomerate. Is if they were an independent, family-owned business again. There's hope in that. Because then it's just about, hey, we want to cover Pasadena, not industry, or even just the San Gabriel Valley, not West Covina and all that stuff. I would say, you know what, find a source you like that you consider reliable subscribe to it, read it every day. Don't be afraid to write a letter to the editor. Most letters to the editor are not kind to the newspaper itself, because it's always the people who complain. I used to get, I don't get them so much anymore. I mean, when I first started, I think my first 20 letters to the editor is, "You're never going to print this." They were all about political gumbo. Somebody wrote, "Gumbo stinks." That was the headline they put on their letter. James went, "What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to write that, I'm going to run that letter, and I'm going to run that headline, and I'm going to let them have their opinion. And then I'm going to, when I get off work, I'm going to have a steak and a beer, and I'm going to watch TV, and so what?"
Right.
But I think find an outlet you like, identify why you like it, and find out for yourself if it's reliable. But be honest with yourself. Are they really telling me the truth, or are they telling me what I want to hear? There are a lot of things that sprout up that are completely unreliable. There's no such thing as activist journalist. You're not one or the other, but you're just not both.
Right.
If you are pushing a cause as a journalist, you're not a journalist. You're an activist doing social commentary, and that's okay. But don't say I'm an unbiased journalism. We all have bias. We all have a bias. I'm sitting here right now with every bias, as many as you and you. My job is just not to report through my bias, through that lens. But we all have them. It's when you start reporting through them, you're not a journalist anymore.
Right.
That's not journalism.
So I studied political science. That's what I got my degree in. And I had a professor my freshman year that every reading assignment we had to turn in a 3x5 card with the description of what we read. It was a pain in the butt. But one of the questions that we had to ask every time we had a reading assignment was, what was the bias of what you read? And mostly what we read was textbooks. So, but we had to
Find the bias.
We had to find the bias
Right.
in even the textbooks that he provided us. And I thought that was a lesson that I've carried to this day, and it was 25 years ago now. And I don't think we ask that question anymore.
Right. And you know what? Even bigger than that is confirmation bias.
Right.
And I see that all the time in guest op-eds. People have an idea, and everything they write is to support the idea. But when you're reading it, you're going, what about, and I'll say to them on the phone, okay, let me play devil's advocate. What about this? What about this? And I'm like, you're entitled to your opinion, but you have a confirmation bias. You're creating an answer to what you support. And you see it a lot. I don't see it as much as 10 years ago, I saw it in professional journalists all the time. Fox News, obviously. They're not even trying to hide it.
MSNBC.
CNN at times. CNN does a little more comedy with it. But what I do appreciate about CNN is when they do it, it's from a point of view of this is why this is false.
Right.
And then they'll laugh about it. Meaning, you wanted to tell us how stupid the person was.
Right.
And this is what your way of doing that instead
Right.
of just reporting. I think the other issue we really have in journalism right now, TV journalism, and just let me jump on my soapbox in a minute.
Please.
When I was deputy editor at the Weekly, if you gave us an op-ed and I ran it, one time I had a guest op-ed, and it was talking about an MOU between the police department and ICE, right? Which is an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. And the author said, and Michelle Bonnery signed this, the city attorney, right? And so it ran about noon. Michelle calls me and she goes, I'm sending you the MOU. I didn't sign that. And I said, oh, you didn't? She goes, no. So I yelled over to my internet guy, take that down. And so one of the reporters went, why don't you just fix it? Why didn't he ask for the MOU when he wrote it? Either you knew it was wrong or you didn't ask for it, but you reported something as fact that's incorrect. So the whole thing goes. Because now one of your biggest points doesn't exist. My point is this. If you lie to me, I won't use you as a source again. And one of the biggest issues I have with TV news is we see politicians who are just blatantly not telling the truth. And I don't care what they're running for. I don't care what they do. But we keep going back to those people. And a lot of that is what January 6th was about. Mm. If we keep giving people platforms who are not telling the truth, we can't complain when when the lie is out of control, because media is building it. So I'm like, you know what? If journalism is about truth, if somebody's not willing to tell you the truth, talk to somebody else. Period. I don't care if it's a black person, a white. I don't care about color or race. If they're not telling you the truth and they don't have the integrity, go to somebody else. Period.
Yeah, we've dumbed down our news.
Yep.
And you mentioned social media. I don't want to trash the LA Times, because I was a subscriber. My family subscribed to it. I loved watching and reading the Dodger recap every morning. That's a whole nother topic, because they got rid of that. But if you follow them on social media, they do this 404 section, which is, to me, I think is awful.
Right.
Because they report things, but they use puppets. They use weird graphics to try to be funny and
get hits.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, why can't you just present the information that we need without having a puppet tell me about rainwater and drainage?
Yeah. There was a YouTube, I think it was a debate forum or something, when Barack was running against Mitt Romney. But it was a Republican thing. You know, it was before Romney won the nomination. And he said, I'm not going to answer questions from a snowman. And he didn't participate. And I thought, he's not who I voted for, but I thought, completely agree with him. You know, keep some integrity in the process.
Right.
But, you know, as soon as you start all those news stations we named are great examples. As soon as you start a 24-hour news network, A, it shrinks the news cycle. But B, at some point, even if it doesn't start off that way, it's going to become about ratings.
Right.
And
hits.
And to get those ratings, entertainment follows.
Right.
And performance and what people look like.
Right.
You know, and look at any of those stations and you begin to see that person's not a very good reporter, but they sure are attractive. And so you begin to understand why people are on the air. You know, it's not because they're doing a great... I mean, Cronkite wasn't going to win any beauty contests, but Cronkite was a hell of a reporter.
Right. And
I'd much rather have Cronkite than anybody I see on TV today.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of wrap up this conversation, we have a couple more minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. We're doing really well. But I want to ask you a couple questions before we close out. Because you're, in addition to being a journalist, you're also a screenwriter and a playwright. And you wrote A Liar's Tale in 2005 and then Blackbirds Volume 1 in 2007, which became a wonderful audiobook series.
Right. Audio drama. Right.
We were talking about this before we were recording. So, and you mentioned that you still get questions about Blackbirds Volume 2.
Right.
I would recommend anyone to listen to Volume 1, which is an incredible piece of audio drama. The direction is wonderful. The script is incredible. The story is very compelling. The audio design is just top-notch. Everything about it is wonderful. So when can we expect Volume 2? Because I know you still get questions about it to this day.
Let me jump into the questions first. Okay. I get questions every week from people who want to know Joshua's fate, the lead character.
Yes.
People who want to know, I just told you, I got 12 questions. Last week, in January, I got, for the whole month, like one question a day is what it averaged. And these are people all over the world. I mean, Blackbirds went all over the world, which it beat my highest expectations. So we're talking about during COVID, a bunch of people recording in their closet, professional actors, in their closet so that the clothes would bounce all the, reverb and sound, and absorb the noise, and then we put it all together, and it sounds like you've heard it. It sounds like they're all in the same in a booth somewhere doing it. I got too much going on right now, and I'm trying to shed some things. Obviously, I am hoping that Volume 2 will be in production by the end of this year or the beginning of next year. I know where it's going.
You know the story?
I know the story. I know where it's going. Each one represents a different point of the Black experience. So the first one we looked at heavily at Jim Crow. Now we kind of start to split off and look at a couple of things at the same time. I know where it's going. There will be a Volume 2. I have an idea all the way up to Volume 5.
Really?
Yes. Hopefully I will have the time to do all 5 of them. But I'm writing Volume 3. Not every day, but I'm getting working about every other month on Volume 3 right now. And that'll get more frequent as I get rid of some of these other things. So,
well, I'd love to hear that. That's
can
great.
I stick to Blackbirds for a moment?
Yes, please.
The amazing thing about Blackbirds was I got Hollywood hits. Oh, this would be a great movie. And the first one I jumped up and down. Yes, they're going to make Blackbirds into a movie. Obviously they didn't. So by the time you get the second and third one, it's like, okay, when you call me in, and we sit down and we discuss things, including money, then I'll jump up and down when I know it's about to happen for real. But I still think that's an excellent movie. I still think it's an excellent movie that's sitting there. And it got a lot of hits. I mean, locally and, like I said, around the world. I think it's for... I looked at my stats one day. Somebody in Russia was listening to Blackbirds. And I've gotten emails from France, from Germany. One professor in Arizona taught Black history from Blackbirds Volume 1. Which to me is the most amazing thing to come out of it. Is like, okay, if you took my work to teach Black history or use it as an education tool, that's great. So,
Even if it never becomes a movie, which I hope it does, but if it never becomes a movie, I think you should be immensely proud of it.
Huge.
Because of the impact it's had.
Yeah, and one of the things I do struggle from is I'll do a project like Blackbirds, and then I'm so busy I get caught up in the next thing that I'm in a lot of ways, I'm just now really enjoying some of the success of Blackbirds, because I have to, when I slow down, I go, wow, that's really amazing that, you accomplish this. But I get so many other things besides work going on.
Right.
My daughter, those things.
That's important too.
That is important. That holds a place. But it's not those things that keep me from enjoying the success. It's the side projects and the, hey, can you do this for us? Can you do this? And now I'm really learning that I don't have to take on as many things as I've been taking on. So, and as I whittle it down, it is whittling down. That's why it took me 3 years to get here. Way too many things. So as I check things off, then it becomes, okay, I have some time now for Blackbirds Volume 2, Blackbirds Volume 3, and those things are really important. Blackbirds is really important to me to get it finished.
Good. Well, last question. We have about 5 minutes left.
Sure.
This is my standard question that I end all conversations with now, which is, if you could design a perfect day in Pasadena, from breakfast to late night, what would you do, where would you go, and what would you eat and drink?
No breaking news. Give me about 75 degrees.
I like it.
I would go to Russell's, breakfast burrito, cranberry juice, and I would probably relax at home and just write my own things. That's what my perfect day is. I don't get those a lot. Probably get some weights and some cardio in there somewhere. That would probably be it.
Because what is your day like on a daily basis? You said you wake up at 5.
I wake up at 5, and at 5, James and I make a decision on what stories are going to go, what can hold, and then we come up with a run sheet, top stories. I number the importance of the stories. We then begin to read every single story that's going into the paper. Some of the things have to be fixed between 5 and 6. By 6:30, if it's not ready, it can't go. So some of those things, it's work. So some of those things have to be fixed. After that, I typically try to get some breakfast and a shower. Always get the shower. I don't always get the breakfast. And then it's a determination of what are we doing today. I already know some of what we're doing, but then I'm looking at, okay, what happened yesterday or overnight that we didn't pick up. And so we begin to deal with that, and then I start putting out fires. This group is calling because this story makes them look bad. This group is calling because you missed this, you missed this story, or this group thinks you're favoring this politician over this one. This guy, So I take a little while to put out the fires, and yes, that's part of my job, putting out the fires. And then it's moving to story assignments. Some stories are already in by 8, and then it's starting to read stories, looking at what I'm going to write. And that goes till 4. If there's no breaking news, the world doesn't explode, I'm off at 4. Some days I'll get a phone call at 7 or 8. Hey, we got this situation. So-and-so's covering it. By then, James typically takes over managing editor duties between 4 and 9. The news doesn't sleep. But sometimes you can put it to bed so you can sleep. But you just have to understand that. I know tomorrow morning at 5 a.m., I don't know what it's going to look like. My 5 a.m. tomorrow could be anything. It could literally be anything. Anybody at City Hall, hey, so-and-so's leaving. Story time. So as I say, time to make the donuts and go to the paragraph factory. That's what it is. So.
Well, Andre, thank you for being a trusted source of information in the city, for blending your journalism, but also providing some fiction, and for Blackbirds. I'm really excited for Volume 2.
Oh, man,
I really want to know what happens with Joshua. And for coming on the podcast after all these years, I greatly appreciate it.
Can I say the link to listen to Blackbirds?
Please, for more information,
www.blackbirdsaudio.com.
Great. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. I wanted to thank everyone at Pasadena Media, from George, Chris, Bobby, Jasiri, Eileen, Liza. Is that everyone? Do you think?
And anybody we missed.
Anybody we missed.
We appreciate it.
Especially Terry and Jeff, who do the editing and production assistance. They are incredible. I'm amazed by the team that's at Pasadena Media. I want to thank my Patreon sponsors. For more information, you can go to thecrowncitypodcast.com. I also want to thank my family for being so patient with me. And finally, stay well, stay informed, and as always, I will see you around town.
That's great.
That's it.
That was great.